today, we'll be focusing on news primarily. We tend to pick a topic that we think is particularly interesting. Like 2 weeks ago, we focused on the unionization of Activision's Raven Software, at least their QA team, which was they were interested in pursuing. That sort of news would sort of send shockwaves to the industry, and we may see a lot more teams unionizing. The profit models for a lot of game companies having to update for the change in the way that their workforce would want to be treated. Nothing new has come of that as of late, but that's the sort of topics we'd like to cover. Because it's been a slow few weeks, we're just covering the major news topics. So this week, you have some interesting topics to look forward to. Nintendo Direct did their usual showcase last yesterday for those following along today, Thursday. Basically, they showed their spring and summer lineup of games, which was kind of impressive because Nintendo's been kind of slow to roll out their big titles as the sort of timeline of the Switch has sort of lengthened. But I think you're seeing kind of a renewed support from Nintendo, probably for quite a few reasons. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the showcase. We'll talk about Kirby eating cars, which was kind of weird, but kind of awesome at the same time. We'll cover that. We'll cover the sort of cooler games that were shown at the showcase. Beyond that, there was the PS5 beta firmware that was released. There's not too much to cover there. There's a handful of new features added. I don't think anything that's very telling, but we got some features returned that were on the PS4 that weren't on the PS5, and then a couple like ease of use features that were added to improve upon some of the UI that isn't the best. So we'll just cover that. Other than that, there's some few smaller news items, but the big one that we'll probably cover a bit more is Take-Two and GTA 5. Take-Two had a sort of earnings call that covered a lot of the progress of the GTA series, in part because I think they're sort of winding up to an anniversary, but we got to see how much the trilogy set, the like sort of updated remake, whatever you want to call it, GTA 1, 2, or 2, 3, and what was it? 3 Vice City and San Andreas that got big updates. Those we got to see how much those sold. We got to see an updated sell through number of GTA 5, which is just nuts. And then on top of that, we got sort of a tease of what to expect in the future from Take-Two and Rockstar. They have actually quite a few like really great games that they've released over the years. Certainly when GTA 4 was available, the strategy was kind of not making online games, but making a whole wealth of games that would allow their sales to stay up. Instead, this time around with GTA 5 and it being like an online game, they've sort of just been content with just building up that platform and seeing where they could go with it. And as a result, we've really only gotten Red Dead Redemption 2. But there's games like Bully, LA Noire, their tennis game, and a handful of others that we have not seen updates to. And they teased some interesting things about that. So that's what we can look forward to today. If you're interested in commenting along, today I actually have ability to see your comments. Usually I don't for some reason, but comment away if you'd like. I can respond to them. So let's just dig into it, will we? All right, so the first set of news was Nintendo Direct. If you followed along Wednesday, we got to see a really big update from Nintendo that showcased their games for spring and summer. This is good news because the last Nintendo Direct we had, which is, or the big one that we got was around E3. And that, well, it was post E3, but that showed off, like, here's what you can expect through the winter, which was great. They showed off Metroid. They showed off a lot of games that have already released at this point, but we didn't get much more beyond year 2021. And that's a problem because it's a very popular platform at this point. It's selling more than it has probably in the past 3 years, or at least during the pandemic, it's been selling a lot more than what you normally expect from a console this late into its lifespan. So with this renewed interest in the platform, they really owe it to their customers to sort of lay out what's next for the Switch. What I find interesting about this whole thing is that there is lots of reason to believe that the Switch was going to see the end of its life probably this year, had things been normal for the past 2 years. But at the beginning of the pandemic, Switch sales, which were already quite healthy, saw a significant bump. They saw a lot of software getting sold, Mario Kart, even Animal Crossing that was released, I think the year 2020, saw huge, like massive sales. I think they're above 17 million copies sold. All good news, but there are two things at play. One is I don't think Nintendo has really shown that they were prepared to deal with a renewed interest in the platform. And two, they see there's enough rumors out there that might have indicated that they were planning to do a sort of next version of the console that might have been squashed, not least due to the renewed interest, but also because of hardware shortages that are causing all types of issues across the industry. So 2022, there wasn't a good idea of what was going to be released, but now we're getting a clear idea of what that is. So the big game that I think that you could say is like the biggest showcase piece was Kirby and the Forgotten Lands. This is a bizarre turn for the Kirby franchise, as it's kind of like, I don't know, Adventure Time-ish, where it's a post-apocalyptic world, a world that looks like it's like post-human, and now there's just like puffy creatures with big eyes that run around everywhere. What they showed off in this direct, that was more than what they showed off at the E3 conference, was a lot more gameplay and a new mechanic, which is like engorged Kirby. They actually have a specific name for it. It's like overstuffed Kirby, but he can eat items that are bigger than just like the enemies, which is weird. But they worked it into a cool little mechanic where, say Kirby swallows a car, now he can drive around, and they have parts of the level that seem to encourage like those mechanics. At one point, they show him eating like a scissor lift, and with the scissor lift, he's able to get to higher places. Stuff like that's really neat. I like the way that they've implemented the post-apocalyptic worlds into the mechanics of the game, which I was not expecting. It's a Kirby game that's giving me more interest in the series than I've ever had before, so that's saying something, I guess, if you know me. Which is to say, I've sort of fallen out of touch with the Nintendo platform because I just wasn't really into those sort of games. But they've given a lot to gamers this time around that really appeals to a lot more game taste than they did, I think, certainly during the Wii U and certainly during the Wii. What we got, so this is where things kind of take a turn. Well, actually, first I'll cover the rest of like the big Nintendo games. Splatoon 3, which we knew about, that's being targeted for the summer. We got to see a little bit of gameplay from that. We also got to see Mario Strikers, which I think that series was kind of brought in during the GameCube era, where they had this sort of NBA Jam like soccer game, and they ended up renaming it to Strikers, but as a result, it's like a really sort of frenetic soccer game, kind of like the Mario Golf is a frenetic golf game. It looks great, really promising if you want that sort of soccer on steroids game. Kind of a surprise because I don't think it was announced prior to this, but it looked nice. And then the other big release big announcement that Nintendo showed off was a strategy that they've been taking with the Wii in general, or Switch in general, where they are taking games that were released on the Wii and Wii U, particularly in the Wii U, which just did not have a lot of sales, and updating them and bringing them onto the Switch platform where they're getting like a shot in the arm. It's a really great strategy for Nintendo since it kind of does not task up their internal development teams to work on, like brand new games. Instead, they're just taking games that have everything built up already, probably doing some performance changes and some underlying code that allows it to run well on the Switch, and just porting it right over and letting a new audience enjoy it. This is kind of a strategy that we have not seen before from Nintendo. The Wii did not, was not porting tons of GameCube games. The Wii U wasn't porting tons of Wii games, in part because both of those consoles could play the last generation of game. But it's definitely new for the Switch. So we're getting all this renewed interest in those games. It allows them to sort of pad out the year with a lot of content when they might normally not have content. And I think that's kind of the most interesting thing is that Nintendo's main franchises, which are like Mario and Zelda, and maybe Donkey Kong to some degree, have not been getting the same sort of treatment that you do on usual consoles. You usually see like 2 of them released, 2 major franchises released, and with this generation, we saw Mario get a brand new title that was wholly new mechanics. But then we also got other Mario titles, but they were basically updates to Wii U releases, and that's all we've gotten. Zelda's another similar story. We've only seen Zelda released as not Twilight Princess. Well, we saw Twilight Princess. We haven't seen Twilight Princess yet. We've seen Skyward Sword, but we saw Breath of the Wild, which is a brand new Zelda entry. We also got a remake of Link's Awakening, which we've seen multiple times remade and added. So that's like the Breath of Zelda what we got, but we're not getting the sort of Zelda games that we usually do on a platform where we usually get like 2 full Zelda games in any generation. Given that we didn't see Breath of the Wild, it's probably safe to say that's a late 2022 release. At the earliest, we haven't seen much from it. Even the stuff that we have seen looked very prototypey, so it may still be ways off. So this is very odd for Nintendo in that case. So what they're rolling out instead during these directs is their strategic partnerships, or just people who want to make use of the 110 million installed Switches available to them, and they're porting over games. So what we did see a lot of, beyond like their sort of B titles, which is Fire Emblem and Advance Wars, we saw lots and lots of ports and quasi updates. Of note is No Man's Sky, which has seen a PC, PlayStation, Xbox release, and I don't know, at this point, like 4 or 5 years of progressively building up that title and making it larger and larger. And now we're finally seeing it on the Switch. I will say, it doesn't look like it's a native port. I know that there was no needs an online connection to play, but it definitely looks like it. Well, I think you definitely need an online connection to play anyways, but it looks like it's being a streamed game opposed to a native game. One of the cooler announcements was Portal 1 and 2. These games are amazing. I keep saying how badly I want to buy a PS3 just to play Portal 1 and 2 again, or the orange box plus Portal 2. Amazing games. It's weird because Valve is not big on porting games to consoles. So seeing them finally revive a title and put it on a console is kind of a turn for them. That's just something that we don't usually see. Hopefully this means good things for Valve and its acceptance of porting games to PlayStation, Xbox in the future. I think everybody's kind of crossing their fingers for Half-Life Alyx being ported to the PSVR 2, but also just like a revival of Portal 1 and 2 and Orange Box and Half-Life 1 and 2 would be amazing. So hopefully we get that in the future. Let's see. There was lots of remade/ported games they showed off. This is a weird thing that is common with the Switch. And I think the reason why this is happening is because the Switch occupies like a hardware performance space that really does not compete with next gen at all. It was kind of performant alongside the PS4 era of games or of consoles, but it even still was below that. It's a mobile processor that's or Tegra chip that's embedded in the thing, so it really couldn't keep up with that. So now that we've seen games to move to HD, the Switch is really like far behind what modern development looks like. And that's not to say that games won't be released on it, because clearly that's not the case. But we see two things that are happening. More and more games are moving to streamed. Basically, if they're too performance heavy and there's just not really a way to get it to work on the Switch, streaming is an option. The other thing that we're seeing is old games being ported up to the Switch because they can. Like, you can take a game that ran well on the PS2 or GameCube era of consoles and port it to the Switch, not easily, but you can get it running on it without having like huge performance issues, which is not the same case of taking a performant game that's on PS5 and trying to backport it onto the Switch, which is way more difficult. So as a result, we saw Star Wars: The Force Awakens, which is a collection of I think the first two games, possibly just one, but seeing that being released on it. We got the Ezio collection, which is a collection of the PS3 era. Why am I blanking on the name of it? Assassin's Creed games. There we go. It's that era of Assassin's Creed games being ported over. They are the best Assassin's Creeds in my opinion. But yeah, we get that. We get the Ezio collection, which is Assassin's Creed 2 plus the two expansions that were all focused around Ezio as a character. Those are getting ported over. Kingdom Hearts, which isn't online only. It's a streamed version of the game, but that collects the 3 Kingdom Hearts games that have been released. ChronoCross, which is a that was a PS1 era game that's getting updated for the Switch. Weirdly, it looks great, and it's definitely like a fan favorite game. I still don't think it's as good as Chrono Trigger, but it's still a great game being ported up. Weirdly, Front Mission 1 and 2 being remastered because the original ones did not look anything like the new ones that are being shown off here. So porting up to it. Earthbound is getting a port, not a remake or anything like that, but it's a NES and SNES era game that's being made available on the Switch for the first time. Klonoa 1 and 2, which was a PS1 game, they remastered it for the PS2, and I believe the PS2 version of this is being ported over, or it's the GameCube version, which also got the PS2 version ported over. So, I mean, in all likelihood, it's actually the GameCube version of Klonoa 1 and 2. That's a great platforming game, lots of fun, kind of interesting platforming mechanics involved there. So check that out if you're into platformers. So I mean, like, that was the bulk of the games being shown off. Other than that, things that are new, like Triangle Strategy, is being still being shown off. It looks amazing. If you played Octopath Traveler, it's the same team that made that. But you're getting, like, I think where Octopath Traveler was kind of like a Final Fantasy 6, 7-ish game. It's like sprite-ish or voxel-based, but uses modern 3D effects. It looks great. They're doing the same thing with Triangle Strategy, so it's kind of like a reinvention of Final Fantasy Tactics. It is Square Enix, so I'm sure a lot is going to be borrowed from the mechanics of that. Either way, if you're a big fan of Final Fantasy Tactics, and you should be, it's a fun game that was just extraordinarily difficult. Triangle Strategy should be there for you. So yeah, that was Nintendo's Direct. Lots of content to look forward to. Lots of weird Nintendo titles to look forward to. But like, if this allows Nintendo to focus away from its main mascots and then put more attention on things like Kirby, Metroid, and those sort of games that usually don't get the same attention that Mario, Zelda, and Donkey Kong do, then I'm all for it. It's just kind of a strange strategy of Nintendo's. Like, we're really not seeing the same sort of renewed huge titles release like every 2 years on the platform like we have before. Instead, it's kind of like we got everything up front, we got front loaded games, and now it's just kind of been the sort of B tier of Nintendo titles getting released slowly over this generation, with good and bad results. Like, the good is that we haven't seen like Mario being overdone. Like, we got Sunshine, like 2 Mario Sunshines on the Wii, but instead we're getting a lot of focus on like, Animal Crossing, which typically has not performed very well for Nintendo, but this generation it's done amazing. And as a result, like, Nintendo is putting renewed interest in that. Pikmin has been announced, and I'd love to see more Pikmin. So that sort of thing is the pros of it. The cons is that we're really scratching. It looks like we're really scratching deep to find games that can be ported to the Switch, so there's continued content. And developers are eager to do it. It's just that there's really not a whole lot developers can do as new games are being developed for PS5 and Xbox, and it's going to become more and more difficult to port things to the Switch without them doing some sort of massive hardware update, which I still think might be this year, as like a tease this year and release in 2023. But due to hardware shortages, they may try to just milk the Switch even longer because of how much success they've had. So yeah, that's the Nintendo Direct. Check it out if you want. Otherwise, I've just recapped everything for you, and you get to look forward to Kirby and Mario Strikers in the near future, and Portal 1 and 2. All right. Let me take a drink of water, and we can continue. All right. The next bit of information we got here. PS5 has a beta system for allowing, I think, PS Plus users to get firmware early. And this allows Sony to test out new features that they are probably already in testing, but try it out on a large distributed network that they can have sort of control over and see how things perform. So this allows them to weed out bugs a little bit early than releasing it live and dealing with things like firmware updates on a massive scale that could cause me big issues, and has before. So this beta group allows Sony to play around with basically the next firmware, especially major firmware updates that include a bunch of new features. The benefit of this is that we get to see the new features before we actually can use them, if you're not a beta user like I'm not. So it's kind of dry topic. Basically, all we got is a list of new features that are going to be added to the next firmware whenever it releases. People are testing it out. They're able to elaborate on what the features are and how they behave, because it's in people's hands. So, with that being said, they added new party chat features, which I think is overdue at this point. It was overdue on the PS4. It's overdue on the PS5. And if you are a PS5 user, the party system kind of works by creating one-off parties that you invite people to, and then that party exists and will persist indefinitely until you end the party or leave the party, and then your party goes away from your stack of available parties. It's kind of weird because you get these persistent parties that exist indefinitely, but that you can't re-invite people to, and kind of can be recreated over and over again. So you can end up with basically parties that exist, 10 of them that were just from different gameplay sessions at different times. It doesn't work in practice. It clutters the UI, and it looks like Sony has decided that they needed to do something to fix this. And as a result, what we're getting now are these kind of persistent parties. What that means is that you can create a party, and it's very similar to as it exists today, but people can freely join it now and leave it. So you can create a friends party, and you can change the way people are allowed to join it, and then now you have a persistent party that you can always rejoin whenever you want to start a gameplay session with your buds. It also allows you to just drop in on friends if they're see them online and they have a party open, that sort of thing. How the party management works, they've kind of changed the way the entire game base functions. There's now 3 tabs. Pardon me. There's now 3 tabs that allow you to sort of pick the main states that you'd be interested in, which is like friends list, parties, and then I think like settings, if I'm not mistaken. It cleans up the whole UI, and part of this as well is that in the like chat section now you can see a bunch of status information about people who are in your party, which includes like see who's speaking, which we didn't have before. People who are sharing gameplay. Basically, in your party, you can stream your gameplay to other people within the party, and they can watch along. Now you can find out who is actually sharing that gameplay. So what this means for future functionality is that I could create a party, have my friends join, but what I'm doing is streaming my doing a private broadcast stream of my gameplay, so my friends can tune in privately and watch me play, and it's kind of like an open invitation. And a lot of these firmware features seem to focus around the ease of streaming and ease of making your gameplay available to your friends. So that's kind of like the bulk of UI changes. Let's see what else was added to it. You can now add up to 5 games to your home screen. On the home screen, you have kind of like a bar of all the stuff that you're using frequently. And as you select a new game, one pops up, the last used one will kind of go away. So you can only see so many games. I think it was 3 at first, plus like streaming service and whatever else, and they just kind of bump off as a new one was opened. It's problematic because if, say, you're currently playing, I don't know, Guardians of the Galaxy like I am, games that you might play with your friends are there, but then will get bumped off as you play a game. Or the main game you're playing gets bumped off because you've played a handful of games with friends, and now that one no longer exists. They've added a system that allows you to sticky stuff, basically. So you can go, hey, I want my Guardians of the Galaxy game to be persistent here. And the game I always play with my friends, like Call of Duty Warzone, to be the next tile. So you can keep those there without them sort of becoming deprioritized as new games are played or new features are added that kind of bump out that list. So good for them adding that. It makes your priority games like front and center as long as you want them to be. Friend request rejection is now allowed. Weirdly not allowed before. And then the big one, I think, the most interesting feature, depending on how you used it, was voice commands. So on the PS4, voice commands was part of the main feature set, I think within like the first year or so. If you had the PlayStation Eye or camera or whatever it was called, that had a built-in mic on it, and you could talk to your PlayStation. If you had headphones plugged in that had a mic on as well, you could still talk to your PlayStation. But since the PlayStation 5 tends to always be on, it has a better standby mode than it does before. What it now allows for is that as long as you're within earshot of your controller, which does have a mic on it now, you can do some fun things like watch movies without needing a remote, which is useful for it being more of an entertainment device where you might not want to pick up your controller, but you want to give it a voice command to do something. So adds a bit more functionality and allows the PlayStation to be a better media console than it did before. But it's also returning functionality that was there since the PS4. Caveat to it, it's English speaking only, so it's only being released to English speaking territories. If you're speaking any other language as of right now, you can't activate it. I don't even think they add it as a feature right now. But if you, say, are in France and you're using an English version or like American version of the console, and you're not an English speaker, it won't recognize French as of right now. I'm sure that'll be updated in the future. Usually the way the console manufacturers handle things is there's a thing called eFigs or BFigs, depending on the region that you're in. But basically, it's the regions that are most important to releasing in Europe, which is European standards, basically British, French, Italian, and German and Spanish. And you have to port all the languages at the same time, basically. So you'll have a European build that will be all those languages included. Right now, it's only targeted at England or at English, but I can imagine that in the near future they'll go and tackle handling Italian, French, German, and Spanish at the same time, and you'll get that. And then that also opens up things like, Spanish-speaking Americas, as well as any colonies or former colonies that may speak any of those languages. So you'll get some sort of access there. So that's all of that. We have a couple small bits of news that I thought were worth talking about. So as of, I think, last year, it was announced Jade Raymond, who was formerly part of Ubisoft, and then she was at EA. At Ubisoft, she headed up Assassin's Creed development, bounced around a little bit there, and then at EA, she took up the role of developing their Star Wars games at their Montreal studio. She kind of branched off with a couple of developers that she knew to create a brand new studio called Haven. It was announced last year, but during her announcement of the studio being created, she also talked about the fact that Haven was going to be developing a PlayStation exclusive title. We knew nothing more than just that information. And it's kind of interesting because usually Sony does not work with brand new development teams that have no titles developed out of the gate. But it's Jade Raymond, who is a pretty big figure within the gaming space, and responsible for some pretty important titles. So if she's been able to put together a development studio, I think a lot of developers were interested in what she was doing, and Sony, I think, who's eager to get some exclusivity, especially with inexpensive exclusivity. And I say that because purchasing studios is very expensive, but partnering with nascent, brand new indies or small studios is a lot cheaper. It helps the studio out because they get a quick injection of funds that allow them to start developing their own content. Sony gets the benefit of being able to get an exclusive deal that may get a big hit with that, people would have regularly slept on. Whether or not Haven's able to create a game that people are really interested in is to be seen, but that seems the strategy behind Sony partnering them so early when they didn't have any games to show for the studio name. So we got some information recently, strangely worded information at that. So Jade Raymond comes out, says we're working with Sony to make an online game, that is going to be focused more around inclusivity and like cooperation, opposed to fighting each other or murder, that sort of thing. So it seems to be more benign. I would say it sounds more like what a lot of the metaverse stuff talks around, or even PlayStation Home. If you remember what that was on the PS3, it was like a avatar virtual environment. This might be what they're working on. It's entirely unclear. There's not more details beyond that. What I did find curious was that within her announcing that this is the type of game that they're working on at Sony, she also said that they're not a Sony exclusive studio. The game is, but they're open to buyouts or open to a potential sale. And it's kind of a bold strategy, I'd say, by her, since they don't have a title really to talk about. We don't know what the team is actually capable of. But I think she's reading the writing on the wall, and that she's seeing both Sony and Microsoft having billions of dollars available to them to have strategic acquisitions and partnerships that she wants to sort of take advantage of, and get basically a buyout that would allow her to get funding for the team, probably be on some sort of contract that would have her see through maybe one or two titles. and they get a big payout on the executive team. Again, pardon me, I don't know why I'm yawning so much. It's a long day, I guess. Let me take a sip of water. Pardon me. All right. So, with Jade Raymond bringing that up and making clear that her studio is available to be purchased, the other bit of news that she dropped there was that, again, if they are developing with Sony, they will be working closely with Mark Cerny on the product. So whatever this title is, for Sony to lend out Cerny to the team to develop it out, it must be a pretty important strategic game that they're interested in. And the reason why they might have gone to Haven is because the studio staff might have way more experience than Sony has at building sort of these massive games, which they have not kept up with. A lot of the PlayStation studio titles are these single player, story-driven experiences, and there's a ton of money to be made in these persistent online experiences. So you can kind of see the strategy with them buying Bungie, which I talked about last week, and the strategy behind getting the tech behind that team, and allowing Bungie to kind of operate as they normally operate, as long as they're able to get the technology, their probably inventions for the online space, and their know-how on how to build games like this is important to Sony. It's clearly an important strategy for Sony that they want to build a game that people want. And then partnering with Haven seems to be along the same lines. They have a team which may have more experience than the internal Sony teams have to create this sort of persistent online game, and that's why they pursued a partnership right away. So that's that. I guess another first-party studio or PlayStation exclusive game that we can look forward to in the future. Let's see. Another bit of information that goes in line with this. So Sony, fresh off of their purchasing of Bungie, announced that they still have another $10 billion in strategic partnership and acquisition budget that they have basically until the end of 2023. So when the PS5 was started, obviously it's a Sony parent company, PlayStation as a subgroup of Sony. Sony is also known for its TVs and imaging chips, which I think are their two largest successful products. So they're able to float the company not just on the PlayStation brand alone. Also movies and TV. Movies, TV, and music. Pardon me. So when the PS5 was being released, I think part of this was that Sony acknowledged that in order to be competitive with Microsoft, who was being quite aggressive about making purchases, and that was obvious in the last 2 years of the Xbox One series, Sony was able to basically get a budget approved by Sony corporate that they would have $10 billion, well, actually more than $10 billion, to make strategic purchases over the first couple of years of the PlayStation to build up the studio infrastructure and make the PlayStation 5 more appealing so it would be successful. After the strategic purchase of Bungie, which I think was $3.6 billion, that includes buyout cost plus the cost of retaining talent, there's another $10 billion left for other purchases for the next 1.5 years, basically. What that means, unclear. We don't know what Sony's exactly planning, but we have heard rumors that they are wanting to create something that's competitive with Game Pass. And in order to do that, they need to get more IP acquisition under their belts that fits within the Sony's brand. Typically, what we've seen before is they go after studios, small studios, not publishers, that are good at developing specific types of games. And then I think the intent here is that they leverage the sort of expertise behind Sony Santa Monica, Naughty Dog, now Insomniac, and Sucker Punch, and all those studios. But the sort of collective experience in developing experiences, that's creating narratives, that's creating using mocap facilities, their QA teams, their asset development teams, that sort of leverage. and will buy out a company that they feel can merge into that, and then get their productivity increased by using like the shared resources. What's sort of been shifting here is like purchases like Bungie and a handful of other purchases that they made with over the last couple of years are less about them building out their studio structures and having like more teams capable of making more narrative games, but now they're focusing on studios that have specific expertise in areas. Bungie being expertise in massive online games that are these persistent money making machines. Sony clearly wants to get in that space, and that would help a service like a Game Pass competitor if they could create a game that needed PlayStation Plus to play. It would make a lot of sense to sort of get people onto the PlayStation Plus platform. Additionally, we're seeing a lot of games being ported to PC now. And they've acquired developers that are particularly talented at porting games to PC, like Bluepoint, and doing sort of remasters as well. All this seems to indicate that Sony is sort of pursuing not just this massive persistent online game, but they're also maybe looking at bolstering out the PC player space, but trying to move the fans of the PC games into purchasing a PS Plus like subscription to enjoy those games or enjoy the online aspect of it. Similar to how Game Pass functions in a way to get people Microsoft content on the PC and Xbox. So there's some sort of strategy being hatched here. You can see it with the way that they're making these strategic acquisitions. We'll likely see it in their future acquisitions. It's just unclear exactly what the strategy is because they've not announced a Game Pass competitor. They haven't announced how they're going to be changing their services space, PS Plus type spaces and PS Now, how they're going to change those to make them more appealing. It's just been quiet, and I expect probably by the end of the year that a veil will be lifted and sort of their long-term strategy on these things will be more apparent at that point in time. All right. Two last bits of news. Nintendo Switch officially becomes the fastest selling console of all time. Keyword here is fastest selling, but it's still nothing to scoff at. Basically, what this means is the Nintendo Switch over the period it's been out has sold more consoles than any other console in the same period of time. It's a huge achievement for Nintendo. The Switch was not on that trajectory prior to the pandemic. It was still going to sell extremely well. It was still a very healthy performing console, but since the pandemic, basically we've seen a pretty sharp incline over in sales that have allowed them to achieve this sort of metric. Even though it's their fastest selling console, it's still one of the highest selling consoles they've ever produced. The DS is only outclassing it really. At this point, I think it just surpassed Wii sales, but the DS is the next highest selling platform. But it was out for a lot longer before it hit its basically. I think it was 151 million consoles sold, whereas the Switch is like at 110-ish, I believe. This still puts it ahead of the PS2, PS1, and PS4, which are some of the other highest and fastest selling consoles out there. The one thing it has not crowned yet is obviously the DS sold more than it, so it hasn't been able to outpace the sales yet. And same thing with PS2. PS2 I think was closer to like 155 million units sold by the time they retired the whole console. But still, I'd say the Switch probably has at least 2 more years on it. If they can maintain sales and if they can keep rolling out good content, we may very well see the Switch nab the top spot with the most sold consoles, or at least maybe steal the crown from the DS as the most sold Nintendo console. And the last bit of news, we're going to focus on Take-Two and Rockstar Games. So there's 2 major pieces of information that came out in the past week. I think they had some sort of earnings report, but we got, or just a performance report on the GTA series as a whole. We finally got to see what sales are looking like for GTA as a whole. So the big thing here is that GTA 5 has now sold 160 million copies, which is insane. I think it's the highest selling game of all time. It's still questionable how you measure that, but still, it's 160 million sold units. It's made Take-Two and Rockstar like tons and tons of money. But as a whole, the GTA series as a whole has sold 360 million copies. I mean, every single game that they've produced within the GTA line has sold tons. Even back then, when we were looking not at persistent online games, but things like GTA 4, GTA 3, we were seeing sales of those like over 20 million, which is a huge achievement for any game, really. Even Nintendo's best-selling games, are scratching close to that 20 million units sold. And then, games that are locked down to a single console, like say, take God of War. I think God of War is somewhere around the 16 million, 17 million units sold. So, yeah, 30 million units per game is ridiculous. 160 million units is just mind-boggling. It really is. And it's why Take-Two has really not focused on sequels for quite some time. They've really only juggled between Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption. And then since Grand Theft Auto 5, they turned into a persistent online game. They've really put very little investment in any other titles. And that includes a sequel to GTA, like the long-awaited GTA 6, in part because they don't want to figure out how to migrate all of their users that are playing GTA 5 over to a GTA 6 online game that's likely to have lots of bugs and issues and cause people to reject it, and them having to rebuild their massive player base over that period of time. So what was a bit surprising out of this whole thing was, one, the Trilogy Remaster, which was released, I want to say, in October last year, has now sold 10 million copies already. I'm sure it will continue to sell copies, but yeah, it's a game that most people have already purchased or played in the past, and a minimal remaster has still netted at 10 million copies sold, which is a pretty big achievement. And like the last bit of kind of unexpected news out of it was that their CEO was talking about games to look forward to. And as I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, the Take-Two's repertoire, or like their, I guess, back catalog of games is best said, includes things like Bully, includes LA Noire, includes their tennis game, and there's there was a handful of other games that I think were significantly less popular, but important nonetheless. Max Payne is one of the bigger ones. The whole thing there is that none of those games have seen any love or attention for quite a long time at this point, despite people clamoring for a new Bully game and clamoring for, a new Max Payne. Those sort of have just been, put to the wayside. And Remedy also has not been on the Max Payne series for quite some time. But that being said, CEO decided to address this. I think it's in part addressing the sort of lack of new development coming from Take-Two. They did say that they are interested in sequels and to a lot of their old IP, and we should be expecting some announcements real soon, probably concerning Max Payne and LA Noire, which is, I think, the most recent big games that don't require them building out quite a large world. So stuff to look forward to if you're a fan of Take-Two. What this might say about Take-Two is that we might be like entering a new phase for them, where I think the success of GTA 5, although planned, probably was not anticipated that it would be this massive, and has taken a lot more resources from the whole team to sort of switch focus, and instead of doing, this sort of staggered development where you might have two split teams working on one title that releases, and then the next team sort of starts working on the next one, and so on. Instead, all development was shift towards GTA 5. They were able to get Red Dead Redemption 2 out during this same period of time, but a much larger slowdown in their sort of development of games. And with the couple of years that it's been since GTA 5 has been released, I mean, I want to say more than a couple of years because honestly, it was released on PlayStation 3, and we're now going into PlayStation 5 era with an updated version of it. What this sort of time has allowed is them to sort of readjust their team so that they can now work on multiple development while simultaneously supporting GTA 5, and the development of GTA 6 will likely have also a large online component. So this time has been bought for them to change their teams, refocus it, and build up the teams that need to be built up to focus on GTA 5 while building up the teams to work on separate IP at the same time. Good news for them, good news for us, because I think a lot of these titles really deserve a sequel, and we'll be getting that soon. So that's it for this week. There's no more news that I have to report on. I don't have any new topics either. Like always, I keep my ear to the ground and find out what interesting new news topics there are to talk about. If you like what we do, we're on every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, where we will talk new game industry and news, and periodically when Eric is here, we'll geek out about our games sometimes. I think the last major one was on Metroid and our love for the Metroid franchise. So if you like what we're doing, tune in every Thursday on Twitch